and welcome to another quilt story. I'm Lisa Walton, and today I'm so pleased because I'm chatting with Deborah Boschert. Deborah and I have known each other for quite a while now because we've both been on the board of SAQA, and I was the president of SAQA, Studio Art Quilts Associates, and Deborah succeeded me. So now she wears the crown, which she's not wearing today, but she looks gorgeous in it. So welcome, Deborah.
Hey, Lisa, thanks for having me. So fun to see you on my screen again.
It's been a while, yes. So we're going to be talking about a quilt called Tree Lines today, and it's sort of a series of yours, isn't it?
It is sort of this linear abstracted landscape series. I've done several.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about one in particular, but I know there's some photos of other ones and your inspiration. So let's switch over to have a look at the presentation. So here we have one of your tree line quilts, and I do like the linear look. It really sort of fills up a really nice space, and we're so used to seeing quilts that are horizontal, so this one is really nice. Would you like to tell me a little bit about your inspiration for these quilts?
This one is Tree Lines, and it was inspired by a bus trip that my family and I took when we were in the Netherlands a couple of summers ago. We took the bus from Amsterdam to Edam, and I was just entranced by some of the beautiful landscape that I saw along the way. So this is not a great quality high def photo because I took it from the seat of a moving bus, but you can sort of see the inspiration of these lines of trees all regularly planted at this patterned interval, different shapes and sizes. And I love riding the bus and seeing interesting things all over the world. So this is one of the photos. Yeah. And then here's this other line of trees. I find that really, really beautiful. And I was also, it's fun to see all those classic black and white cows in the landscape there. So another inspiring photo that was one of the source images for that work.
I think you have to go to New Zealand because they have the most amazing similar trees, but different shapes, and the light that comes through them is really beautiful too. So I also have a collection of out of car window tree shot.
Right. Yeah.
I think as artists we do that, don't we? We always sort of the camera's there all the time. Thank goodness for digital photos.
Right.
So then you come home.
Yeah, then I came home and I began making some sketches. And I will say that I was sort of motivated to enter the Quilters Guild of Dallas show. This is my home guild, and we have a big, really fabulous quilt show every year. And I wanted to enter the large applique category, which requires that at least one side be at least 72 inches long. It doesn't require that both sides are at least 72. So I could do wide but short. And that category is usually Baltimore album style applique and other fine workmanship, which is not exactly what I do, but I thought it would be interesting to enter that category and just see what my work would look like alongside other quilts in this very kind of basic, straightforward category, large applique.
That is quite large, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, sort of an interesting challenge. So I knew it needed to be at least 72. So I was using those sketches to think about the proportion. And then I began pulling out fabric and putting them up on my design wall. This is a very early possibility. And again, thinking about those lines of trees, some of them connected, some separated, sometimes the pattern interrupting itself. Those are things that I find interesting in the early part of the design. Here's another early version. I think probably almost none of this actually ends up being in the quilt, which is sort of a good example of the part of my design process where I had some super simple sketches, but then really it's all about folding and pinning and scrunching different fabrics onto the design wall, standing back, looking at them, trying different configurations, auditioning different possibilities, really working directly with the cloth. So here you can see there's these two purple strips, and you can see that they are one piece of fabric cut into two separate pieces. So that was one of the tree line patterns that I was considering. Those did not make it into the final tree lines quilt that we're talking about today, but I did incorporate both of those into other linear abstracted landscape quilts. And I think we have a picture of those. Yeah, so in the middle of this quilt, you see the lavender trees that were on the design wall from before. So this quilt, which is called Daybreak, came several months after the tree lines quilt that we're talking about. So eventually that purple strip of trees found its way into something else.
I really love the positive and negative versions of those strips. I think that's really clever. And the fact that you used the negative one here was great.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, see, so there's the other purple strip with the lavender as the background. And in this case, the trees then become the navy fabric under. And you can see that one behind me also.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that technique of, if I'm going to make all of those precise small cuts, I wanted the fabric to do double duty, make the work worth it.
Absolutely. Get your value out of them.
Yes, for sure. So here we're getting a little bit closer. The color palette is coming together here, really kind of inspired by that printed cloth in the middle with the tan or light off-white background, and then lots of greens, oranges, blues, and browns. So that kind of began to act as a focus for the whole palette. And then I have those orange trees, teeny tiny orange trees at the top. So really I was starting to feel like something good was happening finally at this point. I love to incorporate surface design in my art quilt collages, which are really all about layering fabric, paint, and stitching. And so I wanted to include some handwriting, which is one of my favorite kind of graphic elements. So here I was testing some different colors. I wanted to have this green barn or house shape, and I thought that it would be fun to cover that with handwriting. So those are some of the options that I considered. And then I did end up, I think it's green on green that I ended up having that large horizontal house, short barn-like structure with all the handwriting. Yeah, so there you go. You see all that green on green scripty handwriting, which I usually make intentionally illegible. And that's because I want the viewer to think that there's some story or narrative behind the work, but I don't want them to be distracted by trying to actually decipher it. So I probably wrote about my memories of our Amsterdam trip, but even I don't think I could decipher it.
I've been talking to Susan Shy, who does her writing with a narrative, and that's also amazing. Just incredible.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
And I have spent some time in front of Susan Shy works actually reading it. And boy, that really enhances the experience. I love it.
So I noticed also there's a, looks to be a sun print of a stencil or just some stencil work, I assume to be your son.
Yes, that's actually a stencil made with hot glue. So you squirt out the hot glue like on a Teflon sheet. In a motif, in this case, kind of a sun motif, and then you let it cool, and then you can peel it off the Teflon sheet, and then it's like a mask. So more of a mask than a stencil, because then I had a little spray bottle with watered down acrylic paint that then I spray through the hot glue mask.
And was that just something that you'd done ages ago and you found a use for, or did you do it specifically for this project?
No, it was something I had in my stash, and you can see that yellow fabric that has the raindrops printed on it. That was also something it's an original print with an original stamp made with fun foam, and that was also just in my stash from previous surface design making sessions.
Always fun to find those things that are just perfect, aren't they?
Exactly. So I'm looking at the piece on the design wall, and I see that there's a problem with this line of red trees. And that is that there's not enough contrast between the red trees and the green fabric behind them. So I had to go shopping for fabric. So then in the next picture, you see here I am, I've cut some little swatches of the fabrics in the quilt that I'm working with. And I brought one of the red trees with me to look for a better background for those red trees. So this is the green that I ended up substituting for that previous green, which really just didn't provide enough contrast. And here I'm adding some other elements. This is the really kind of collage style of my work. So I had these green printed spiky triangles that I really like, and they just kind of blend in with that green section of the quilt. So I like that it all kind of appears as one thing, one green line or green section. But then as you get up close, you see that there's a few different green patterns in there. And then you have these spiky triangles, kind of suggesting more botanical kind of landscape elements. I think that I didn't have enough of that green fabric. So I reached out to a friend of mine, Kristen Laflamme, who has a healthy fabric stash. And she happened to have some more of the green spiky triangles and sent me this strip. So that saved the day. So here you see just more in progress, all of those strips working together. I'm thinking about all of the different details. I'm thinking about the width of each of those strips. I want them to all be slightly different. I'm thinking about the edges of all the different strips. So you have that kind of wavy yellow line. And then I tucked some brown kind of bumpy, suggesting of maybe dirt behind the tan trees, and everything is just kind of constant improv, auditioning, considering possibilities, looking at all kinds of different ways to break up the lines, but also to have the lines sort of visually connect to each other. Because it's so big, you know, I'm pinning pieces and they're flopping over, and it was a good challenge, but I don't generally work this large. And those strips ended up being really long, but I made it work. I like seeing this picture where it really makes me feel like, yeah, you just kind of got to keep going.
I do like the way that you have the trees are diminishing in size. So you have that effect of distance, which is really lovely. Otherwise, it would have been very flat.
Yeah, you're right. I think it kind of is a little bit of both, because, you know, the blue trees are bigger than the trees in front of them. So I'm not completely anchored to reality. Obviously, there's so many things here that are sort of inspired by what you might see in a landscape, but I don't for reality, but is interesting visually. I lean more into the interesting visually than into the reality. But
Like
yeah, I think you're right that the orange trees at the top really, they work.
But then you've got those enormous flowers in the greenhouse. So
Yes, exactly.
yeah, but it works.
So I think at this point, I felt like the design needed something to ground it right at the bottom. And so I went back to look at my source pictures, and I looked at these grasses in the water at the side of the road, and I thought that would really work. So I ended up adding some grassy shapes at the bottom of the quilt. Yeah, so here you see these grassy reeds cut out, and in several different colors and patterns. Again, that idea that they all read as a similar color and shape, but when you get up close, you see that there's lots of different fabrics there layered on each other.
Which is what happens in reality as well.
Exactly. So then still more layers, still more like processing and thinking about the design and wondering, does it need more? Does it need less? And I really wanted to add more paint and a motif that I could create with a fun foam stamp. So I sketched some possibilities here, and I ended up making a fun foam stamp, which I don't have a picture of. I apparently stopped taking pictures at this point. But that motif with the kind of leaf-like shapes in the bottom left, I ended up making a stamp inspired by that sketch. And then I stamped it in green paint right on the surface of the quilt. And you can sort of see that in this picture here in the foreground. You see those green leafy shapes. Again, back to the idea of not being anchored to reality. Here you have these green leafy shapes that are literally just floating across the surface of the quilt as if there's no perspective or sense of depth in the quilt, which is sort of what I'm going for. I like that it's flat. I like that there's different things, unexpected elements, and repeated patterns that you see in different parts of the quilt. So stamped right on the surface.
I like your way of thinking with the layering. I always feel that when I'm working on a quilt, it's not finished till it's finished. It's like you keep looking at it and you keep thinking, no, it just needs something else. And yeah, like you, I'm not averse to getting out the paint and adding that other layer of texture. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think what I wanted was to visually connect the horizontal strips more. And so this stamp going from the navy onto the yellow and up into the blue sky really kind of connects them more in a way that made it feel more cohesive to me. Sometimes it is scary to add paint to the surface of a mostly finished fused composition. But you know, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get in that discomfort.
Take that leap, yes.
So then the top was finished. So my process and technique uses all raw edge fused applique. So every piece that you see on that whole composition has fusible webbing on the back of it, and they're all fused to each other and then fused to the batting. Okay. So after that step is done and the top is fused to the batting, then I am thinking about the stitching. And I love to incorporate both hand embroidery and free motion quilting. And so I've created for myself some sketches and some printouts where I can doodle all kinds of different possible motifs to stitch both by hand and by machine. And you can see that I was thinking about that green house shape and feeling like some kind of stitching needed to go there. Like it was almost acting as a frame for some kind of interesting stitched motif. And I was beginning with these sketches to kind of figure out what that might be.
I notice we have a Craft Industry Alliance pencil there. So
I do.
Would you like to just tell everybody what the Craft Industry Alliance is?
Yeah, sure. Craft Industry Alliance is an organization of professionals in the craft industry. So as a artist, author, and teacher, it provides me with all kinds of resources that help me professionally. Also provides me with lots of networking opportunities with other professionals who have experience in all kinds of areas of business. The Craft Industry Alliance also has lots of articles about the state of the craft industry, which covers everything from quilting to knitting to retail stores. And you know, there's a lot to think about and a lot to learn and a lot to network and support each other as professional artists or professionals in the craft industry. So it's a membership that I definitely really, really enjoy and value.
Okay. All the links for Craft Industry Alliance and SAQA are all in the description box below. So check them out and join.
Yeah, for sure. So here's the tree I was thinking. Yeah, so I was sketching some possibilities there and thinking about creating this outline of a tree with stitching. So here you see I'm actually doing the stitching. And I wish that I had a wider shot of this process, but what I did was sketch that tree silhouette onto freezer paper. Then I cut it out and then I ironed that freezer paper pattern onto the surface of the quilt. And that's the white paper that you see there. You can see it's pinned in some areas because the freezer paper with the manipulation of the stitching, kind of started to peel up. So I'm using that freezer paper as a pattern to stitch around, and then cutting off the sections that I didn't need any longer. And I do this because I didn't want to mark the pattern on the surface of the quilt, because I have not found any kind of marking pen that I am absolutely convinced is going to go away when I want it to.
I have found a marking pen, but unfortunately the only place I can buy it is in Japan. So last time I was there, I bought a pack of 12, and that should see me out until the next trip to Japan, I think. But that one does disappear so far.
Yeah, maybe you should put a link to that in the chat box below.
Unfortunately, the website doesn't speak English, and they don't sell internationally. So you'll have to come on a tour with me to buy them.
All right,
Anyway,
it's on my list of things I'd love to do. The freezer paper pattern as a pattern to stitch around really works well for a relatively complex shape.
And do you do this before? Oh no, it's already on the batting, isn't it?
It's on the batting, yep. So the hand stitching I do through the top and the batting. And I love that because it provides, it has a lot of body because it's fused to the batting, which means I don't need a hoop. And then I fuse on a backing, and that covers all the knots and trails from the hand stitching. And then I do the machine quilting through all 3 layers.
Yes, because my hands don't like hand stitching, so I think that would be a lot softer because you just have one less layer of fabric to go through. So that would work for me. Definitely.
Right.
This is your book.
It is. I had the great pleasure of putting together my inspiration and process and techniques in this book, Art Quilt Collage, A Creative Journey in Fabric, Paint, and Stitch. And it really does include all of the techniques that we've kind of been talking about, that you've seen the process on this particular quilt, choosing fabrics, taking inspiration from a photograph, but sort of abstracting it, handwriting as a surface design element, and creating original stamps and adding that as an additional element of design. So that was it. I'm really thrilled to have had the opportunity to put that out in the world.
And this one.
Yeah, so this one also is really has been a great project. People ask me all the time about the idea of how do you find your voice? Because my work is somewhat recognizable, and I have developed familiar techniques and motifs that are recognizable as mine. So as I began to think about that question of how do you find your voice, I came across a quote about using your head, your heart, and your hands. And I thought more and more about that. And what I really settled on is that to make your best original work that is unique, I think you really have to maximize what's going on in your head. So, like the ideas that you want to explore, what's going on in your heart, the things that you're like really excited about and make you happy, and maximize the skills that you have in your hands. So that's like the techniques that you're good at and that you enjoy. And so once you put all of those things together, I think you can really get towards making your own best unique work. So I put together some lists and exercises and prompts in this workbook that explore that idea of creative voice.
If you feel a little bit like you need that prompt, I think these books would be perfect for that.
It's sort of an ongoing process, don't you think?
Absolutely.
So here is Tree Lines on exhibit as part of SAQA's global exhibition, which is titled Connecting Our Natural Worlds, which premiered at the Sonoran Desert Museum last year, and I was delighted to be included. And I always think it's cool to see images of quilts hanging on the wall in a gallery. So here's my tree lines with some other wonderful works.
That's a beautiful shot. The catalogue is available from the SAQA website, and I do recommend that you go and have a look at it. And all the SAQA exhibitions have the most luxurious catalogues. So it's a great way
They
of,
really do.
they do. And just to think about the history of the art quilt. And of course, we have these wonderful books as well that are also available on the SAQA website.
There's also, for this exhibition, several little short video interviews with different artists talking about their quilts. And that is something SAQA has really expanded their online video content. And boy, it's so fun to listen to artists talk about their work and be able to hear them say interesting things and put a face with a name, with a quilt. So there's also several videos from this particular exhibit.
Here we have a close-up with your hand stitching as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so you really can see this idea of layers of fabric, paint, and stitching, and lots of hand embroidery, those orange kind of sprout stitches on top of the yellow strip, and you see that green stamp stamped over the top. And then you can kind of get a little bit of the suggestion of the machine quilting. I'll also tell you a little bit of a secret that you can pick up on in this picture. You remember that photo with the beautiful black and white cows that I loved?
Yes.
And I sort of wanted to have a little bit of a nod to those cows. So I had this black and white fabric, which you can see just a few little snippets of snuck in there. Certainly they don't look like cows, but I remember them as the suggestion of those cool looking cows.
I was wondering where the cows were going to come in, so I'm glad to see.
There you go. There they are, the little black and white cows. And here you can see that hand-stitched tree silhouette over the green house shape. And that turned out really well. I was really pleased with how that came together. And something that, you know, I didn't really plan it. I do the fabric layer first, sort of knowing that I'm going to be adding stitching later and that the stitching is going to do something fun and fabulous and enhance it and elevate the design, but not necessarily specifically planning the stitching. So this really turned out, I really like that, the way it spills over the greenhouse and into the background. Mm-hmm. And then I changed the color of the stitching so that it goes down over the red trees and into the bottom part of the quilt. So that was, and this tree actually is sort of based on a tree that is at the end of my alley. So I drive down the alley and I see this kind of configuration of branches.
Where the tree actually has quite a dominant feature now, doesn't it?
Right. It's one of those things that, like, once you see it, you see it even more. Yeah, this was a really fun piece to work on. And I love, it's still traveling with SAQA's global exhibition, Connecting Our Natural Worlds, which I hope will have some more venues in 2021.
That was really lovely. I love the blue one behind you, the blue and purple one behind you. Yes, it's really gorgeous.
Thank you.
You and I have a very similar way of working. It's like we're not quite sure what it's going to be when it's finished, but there's just an idea in our head and it just keeps growing. And I really like that about the way I work. I very rarely have the slightest idea what something's going to look like at the end.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I have enough of an idea that I feel motivated to take the next step. Mm-hmm. But yeah, people who plan and draft and measure and pattern everything, that's just a whole different way of working.
It is. I have great admiration for them. I cannot think that far ahead. I start with an idea and then just hope for the best, really, sometimes. So with this awful COVID, many of us are now teaching online, and Deborah has some interesting classes as well. Would you like to just give us a brief outline of what you're teaching online?
Oh, sure. I have workshops and programs and lectures that I'm happy to offer to guilds all over the world. And that's been super fun to meet people from my studio. I also have some independent classes. You can find those on my website. They're all based on this idea of layering, fabric, paint, and stitching, but I love to talk about good design and captivating compositions. I also have some workshops that explore the idea of having a personal symbol to give your work some narrative or meaning, and lots about hand embroidery, all kinds of interesting and fun techniques.
Great. Isn't it wonderful how we can teach all over the world now without leaving our studio? I'm loving it.
Really intimate about it. I have had some classes where students really enjoyed being together on the screen and looking at each other's work on the screen, and being able to also turn their mic and camera off and work along, but know that we're all right there together. It's so interesting. I think it's really, it's an exciting new possibility. I'm still looking forward to being back to teaching face-to-face. So we'll look forward to that in the future. Both are good.
Both are good. I've found that a lot of my students are very happy because in a classroom situation, they might all be crowded around you while you do a demonstration, but here they have absolute close-up filling their screen of exactly what's happening, and they do really appreciate that. So I'm enjoying it as well. Definitely. I'd like to thank you very, very much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been fun. It's always great to catch up with you, even if we're not in board meetings or even in person. Here we are on Zoom. And I think it's going to be like this for a little bit longer. We've made the effort to connect like this, and I think that's really important. Please click the subscribe button that's just popping up here. And if you'd love to leave a comment about Deborah's work, I'm sure she will answer it. Or I will answer any comments to me, or make suggestions for other artists that you'd like to see. Please give a thumbs up, because that's what YouTube apparently users promote these videos, and I would like to spread the word far and wide. So thanks, Deborah. It's been great, and I hope I'll see you soon, either in person or on Zoom. So thanks,
you,
Deb.
Lisa.
Bye, everyone.